Prepare for a story that shatters a life built on control. Before we unravel this shocking mystery, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss how this incredible journey unfolds. Alexander Vance had constructed his entire world on the bedrock of absolute control. He was a titan of industry, a man who didn't just anticipate outcomes. He dictated them. Emotions were variables he eliminated. Logic was his only compass. But all it took was one ordinary evening, a quiet dinner in a small, unassuming cafe, for his meticulously built reality to crumble into dust. The moment he heard the fragile sound of a child's quiet sobs cutting through the gentle hum of conversation, he hadn't expected to feel anything but mild annoyance. The very moment his gaze landed on her small figure, on those wide, tear-filled blue eyes the exact startling shade of his own, he hadn't expected to feel anything at all. And when her mother turned, a woman from a past he thought was buried forever, her face pale and frozen in shock, whispering his name like a ghost finally stepping into the light, Alexander knew with a chilling certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Because the little girl wasn't just a lost child crying in a cafe. She was his daughter. And until this impossible moment, he had never even known she existed. Alex Vance was a man for whom control was everything, in the boardroom, in complex negotiations, in life itself. Everything followed a rigorous plan. There were no surprises, no missed opportunities, no lingering loose ends. That ruthless precision was how he built his global company, how he maintained his untouchable success. But tonight, for the first time in years, he deliberately stepped away from the gilded cage of corporate galas and strategic investor dinners. He craved something different, a quiet meal somewhere far from the usual luxury and the prying eyes of the city's elite, a place where he could simply be anonymous. He found himself in a small, family-owned cafe downtown. It was warm and inviting, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and grilled spices. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the booths echoed with genuine laughter instead of hushed, calculated business conversations. Waitstaff bustled between tables, greeting regulars by name, a palpable sense of community in the air. Alex chose a table by the window, ordering a simple steak and a glass of deep red wine. He allowed himself a rare moment to simply sit and breathe, to look around without the crushing weight of impossible deadlines pressing down on him. It was strange, he realized, how utterly unfamiliar relaxation felt. He was about to take his first sip of wine when a sound sliced through the gentle murmur of the cafe, a soft, trembling, heartbroken sob. He glanced up, scanning the room until his eyes landed on a tiny figure near the counter. A little girl sat curled on the floor, her small shoulders shaking as she wiped frantically at her face with even smaller fists. She couldn't have been older than 5. Dark curls framed her round face, and even from a distance, Alex could see the vivid, shocking blue of her eyes, overflowing with tears. Something deep in his chest tightened, an unexpected, unwelcome sensation. He wasn't the kind of man who got involved in the messy personal matters of strangers, let alone the problems of a crying child. But something about this little girl, sitting alone and looking utterly lost and scared in the middle of a busy cafe, made it impossible to look away. A strange, inexplicable pull drew him forward. He pushed back his chair, the scrape loud in his ears, and crossed the room in a few long strides. He crouched down beside her, his movements slow and deliberate, careful not to startle her. "Hey," he said gently, his voice a low rumble, softer than he usually allowed it to be. "Are you okay?" The little girl sniffled, her small body trembling, and looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks, her big blue eyes widening as they met his. I'm lost," she whispered, the words barely audible above the cafe noise. Alex felt a surprising pang of concern, sharp and sudden. He'd expected her to say she'd dropped her toy, or spilled her drink, anything easily fixable. But lost? That was different. He glanced around frantically, scanning the cafe for a panicked parent, a searching face, but no one seemed to be looking for a missing child. That inexplicable absence only deepened his growing unease. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and steady, trying not to scare her further. The girl hesitated for a moment, then wiped her nose with the sleeve of her tiny pink sweater. "Chloe." Alex nodded, offering her a reassuring smile he hadn't realized he was capable of. "That's a beautiful name, Chloe. Where's your mom?" Her lower lip wobbled again, and she shook her head, dark curls bouncing. "She was here, but then she went away. She said she'd be right back, but then I couldn't find her." Alex exhaled slowly, a puzzle piece clicking into place. If her mother worked here, she had probably stepped away for just a moment, perhaps to take an order or grab something from the back, expecting Chloe to stay put. But Chloe, being a small child in a stimulating environment, had wandered off instead. He wasn't sure why he felt so intensely compelled to help. He could have easily called a waitress over, let them handle it, retreated back to his table and his untouched, expensive steak. But something about Chloe's wide, frightened, blue eyes, the exact shade of his own, kept him rooted to the spot, a strange, unsettling feeling building in his chest. "Your mom works here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chloe nodded. "She's a waitress." That confirmed it. Alex scanned the room again, spotting several waitstaff weaving between tables, their trays balanced expertly, but none of them seemed to be searching frantically for a missing child. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. Why wasn't anyone looking for her? "All right," he said, extending his hand slowly. "Let's find her together, okay, Chloe?" Chloe hesitated for only a second, her gaze searching his face, before she slipped her small hand into his much larger one. The warmth of it startled him, a jolt of unexpected connection. He wasn't used to holding something so small, so delicate, so utterly trusting. It felt unfamiliar, almost alien, against his calloused palm. But as they stood, his large hand carefully holding her tiny one, and began to walk slowly through the cafe, searching for Chloe's mother amidst the evening crowd, Alexander Vance had no idea that this moment, this small, seemingly insignificant decision to help a lost child, would shatter his controlled world irrevocably and change his life forever. The mystery of her mother's absence, combined with the unsettling familiarity in Chloe's eyes, pulled him deeper into something he couldn't control. Alex walked slowly through the cafe, his large hand carefully holding Chloe's tiny one as he scanned the busy room. The warmth of her small fingers felt fragile against his palm, and he found himself gripping her hand just a little tighter, an irrational fear bubbling that she might somehow slip away from him. Chloe stayed close by his side, her free hand clutching the hem of her small sweater. Her big blue eyes darted around the cafe, searching anxiously for a familiar face. But the more they walked, the more uncertain she seemed, her initial confidence fading. "Do you remember where she was when you last saw her, Chloe?" Alex asked, keeping his voice gentle, trying to soothe her growing anxiety. Chloe hesitated, biting her lip, then pointed a small finger toward the far side of the cafe, where a counter stood with stacks of menus and a vintage cash register. "She was over there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But she went to take food to someone, and then I didn't see her anymore." Alex nodded, a growing sense of unease settling over him, and led her slowly in that direction. The cafe was still bustling with the evening rush, the clatter of plates and murmur of voices a constant backdrop. But as they moved closer to the counter, something shifted in the atmosphere. A voice cut through the noise, sharp with panic, filled with frantic worry and overwhelming relief. "Chloe!" Immediately, Chloe's head snapped up, her face brightening, and she turned toward the sound. A woman rushed towards them, weaving desperately through tables with the urgency of someone who had been searching for far too long, for something infinitely precious. She wore a simple black cafe dress, an apron tied hastily around her waist, and her brown hair was pulled back into a loose, slightly messy ponytail. Her dark eyes were wide with raw panic until they landed on Chloe, and a wave of overwhelming relief washed over her features, making her sag visibly. Chloe's face lit up like a sunrise. "Mommy!" Before Alex could react, the little girl let go of his hand, the hand that had felt so strange and yet so right holding hers, and ran straight into her mother's outstretched arms. The woman scooped her up, holding her tightly against her chest, burying her face in Chloe's curls. "Oh my God! Baby, where did you go?" Her voice wavered, thick with tears and palpable fear, as she smoothed Chloe's hair, pressing kiss after kiss to the top of her head. "I told you to stay near the counter." "I did," Chloe mumbled into her shoulder, her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. "But then I didn't see you, and I got scared." The woman exhaled shakily, closing her eyes for a brief second, holding her daughter as if she might disappear again, before pulling back slightly to check Chloe's face, searching for any sign of injury. "Are you okay? You're not hurt." Chloe shook her head, clinging to her mother. "I'm okay. Nick, the nice man, helped me." Alex, who had instinctively taken a step back to give them space, to remain the anonymous helper, found himself frozen as the woman finally lifted her gaze from her daughter to look at him. And in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. He knew those eyes. They were different, yes, dark brown instead of Chloe's startling blue. But the shape, the way they widened in profound shock, the way they reflected something raw, unspoken, and deeply buried. It was all too familiar. A ghost from a past he thought he'd locked away forever. He knew her, and with a sickening lurch in his gut, he knew she knew him. A moment of suffocating silence passed between them, stretching long and heavy, crackling with unspoken history and a sudden, terrifying present. "Alex!" Her voice was barely above a whisper, a breathy sound of disbelief, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing standing before her. Alex felt something tighten in his chest, a physical ache of recognition, of memory, of a past he had tried to forget. He hadn't heard that voice in 10 long years, but he still recognized it instantly. "Sarah," he said, his own voice lower, rougher than usual. Her grip on Chloe tightened instinctively, a protective, almost fearful gesture. Alex couldn't move. He couldn't think. His carefully constructed walls, his impenetrable control, shattered around him because now that he was looking at her, really looking at her, a horrifying, undeniable realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Chloe. Dark hair like Sarah, yes, but those eyes. Those impossible, bright blue eyes. They were exactly like his own. She wasn't just any little girl. She wasn't just a lost child in a cafe. She looked exactly, undeniably, impossibly, like him. Alex's stomach plummeted. He felt his hands curl into fists at his sides as he forced himself to breathe, to push past the wave of dizziness. He turned his gaze back to Sarah, his jaw clenching so tightly he thought it might break. His voice was dangerously quiet, laced with a chilling intensity that few had ever heard. "Tell me the truth, Sarah." His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat accompanying the question that would tear his life apart and rebuild it in the same breath. "Is she my daughter? Middle, place second CTA here, e.g. Can you imagine the shock? His daughter, right there, and he never knew. The secrets are unraveling. If you're on the edge of your seat, leave a comment below with your reaction and remember to like this video. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat, a painful, ragged sound. Her arms instinctively tightened around Chloe, pulling her daughter closer, as if she could somehow shield the small girl from the immense weight of the moment, from the storm that was about to break over their heads. She had imagined this scenario countless times over the past 5 years, played out conversations in her mind, decided what she would say if she ever saw Alex again, if he ever found out. But she had never, not in her wildest nightmares, been prepared for the reality of it. Alex stood in front of her, his broad shoulders tense, radiating an intensity that was both familiar and terrifying. His blue eyes, so clearly mirrored in the innocent face of the child clinging to her, were locked onto her with an unyielding demand that sent shivers down her spine. He had always had that presence, the kind that commanded attention and demanded answers without having to raise his voice or say much at all. But now there was something different in his gaze. Something raw, something stripped bare of his usual control. Something she couldn't escape. Is she my daughter? His voice was quieter this time, a low, dangerous growl, but the demand in his tone remained, sharp and absolute. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She had always known this day might come. She just hadn't expected it to happen here, in the middle of a crowded cafe, with Chloe's small arms wrapped trustingly around her neck, completely oblivious to the earthquake erupting around them. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her tongue heavy in her mouth. Lying wasn't an option. Not now. Not when Chloe was standing right there, looking like a miniature version of the man who had just asked the most devastating question imaginable. She had already kept the truth from him for 5 years, a heavy secret she carried every single day, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, there was no way to deny it now. No way to hide the undeniable truth staring back at him from Chloe's blue eyes. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second, bracing herself, before meeting his intense gaze again, the gaze that had haunted her dreams for years. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the single word carrying the weight of half a decade of secrecy, fear, and unspoken regret. Yes, Alex, she's yours. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the cafe and the frantic beating of her own heart. Alex didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable, as if he were trying to process a concept too vast, too impossible to comprehend. Sarah braced herself for the storm, for anger, for accusations, for the cold, calculated fury she knew he was capable of. But the look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something akin to profound pain, even betrayal. How long? His voice was controlled, a dangerous calm, but she could hear the tension vibrating beneath it, the barely suppressed rage and disbelief. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat still dry. 5 years. Alex exhaled sharply, a sound of pure shock, running a trembling hand through his dark hair. 5 years, he repeated, the words hollow, as if saying them out loud would somehow make the impossible feel real. He looked back at Chloe, who was watching them both with quiet curiosity, her thumb in her mouth, completely unaware of the meaning, the magnitude, behind their hushed, intense conversation. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? His voice was lower now, rougher, but there was no mistaking the sharp edge of pain and accusation in his tone. Sarah's fingers curled slightly, protectively, against Chloe's back. Because you had your whole life ahead of you, Alex, she said, forcing herself to keep her voice steady, despite the tremor running through her body. You were building an empire. You had investors, high-stakes meetings, deals worth millions. You were traveling across the world, barely stopping for anything or anyone. She broke off, shaking her head, tears blurring her vision. I didn't want to be the person who held you back, who ruined everything you were working for. Alex let out a quiet, humorless laugh, a sound devoid of mirth, shaking his head in disbelief. Held me back. His blue eyes, so like Chloe's, burned into hers, blazing with a mixture of pain and righteous anger. You didn't think I had the right to make that choice for myself? You didn't think I deserved to know? Sarah's chest tightened painfully. Guilt, a constant companion for the past 5 years, weighed heavy on her shoulders, threatening to crush her. I thought I was doing the right thing, Alex, she whispered, the words feeling inadequate, fragile, against the force of his emotion. The right thing. His voice was lower now, raw, etched with pain and resentment. You decided for me, Sarah. You decided that I didn't deserve to know my own daughter, that I didn't deserve to be there for her first steps, her first words, her first birthday. You decided that I didn't deserve to be her father. Sarah flinched as if he had struck her, the truth of his words a physical blow. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. Alex shot back, his frustration finally breaking through his usually impenetrable control, raw and exposed. Tell me how you justified keeping her from me for 5 years. How you thought that was your decision to make. Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling the sting of his words, the brutal honesty of his pain. "I was scared, Alex," she admitted, the confession tearing from her soul. "I was scared that you would see her as a mistake, that you would feel trapped, that you would resent both of us for disrupting your life." Alex's expression flickered for a second, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes, but then his jaw tightened again, the wall slamming back up. "You don't know that, Sarah. You didn't know how I would feel. You just assumed the worst." "You're right," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. "You're absolutely right. I don't know, because I never gave you the chance." For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with decades of unspoken history, with pain, regret, and emotions neither of them knew how to process, how to navigate. It was a battlefield of the past, and they were standing right in the middle of it. Finally, Alex took a slow, deep breath, visibly fighting for control, his gaze shifting back to Chloe. The little girl was still nestled securely in her mother's arms, her thumb back in her mouth, playing quietly with the hem of Sarah's apron, completely unaware of the emotional turmoil surrounding her. Alex crouched down again, leveling himself with her small figure, pushing aside his own shock and pain for her sake. "Hey, Chloe," he said, his voice softer now, the sharp edges gone, replaced by a hesitant tenderness that surprised even him. Chloe blinked at him with wide blue eyes, the exact color of his own, assessing him. "Hi," she said softly, her voice muffled slightly by her thumb. Alex hesitated for only a second, his heart pounding, before asking the question that felt both impossible and necessary. "Chloe, do you know who I am?" Chloe tilted her head slightly, her dark curls bouncing, as if studying him, trying to place him. Then she glanced quickly at Sarah, searching for confirmation or a hint, before looking back at him. You're the nice man who helped me," she said, stating it like a simple, undeniable fact. Alex let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a wave of unexpected emotion washing over him. "Yeah," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips despite the turmoil in his chest. "Yeah, Chloe, I'm the nice man who helped you." He hesitated, his voice quieter now, laced with a profound, life-altering truth. "But I'm also something else." Chloe's brow furrowed slightly, her blue eyes widening with curiosity, the same sharp intelligence he saw in the reflection of his own gaze. "What?" Alex swallowed hard, his throat feeling tight, like the words were caught somewhere deep inside him, buried under layers of years of control and emotional suppression. He had spent his entire adult life closing himself off, keeping emotions locked away beneath business strategies and impenetrable composure. But looking into his daughter's eyes, the eyes that were just like his own, eyes that held only innocence and curiosity, there was suddenly no room for anything but the raw, terrifying, beautiful truth. "I'm your dad," he said, the words a rough whisper, barely audible above the cafe noise, a declaration that ripped through his old life and announced the beginning of a new one. Chloe blinked at him, processing the words, her small face a picture of innocent confusion. She glanced at Sarah again, then back at Alex, a hesitant question in her eyes. "Really?" Alex forced a small smile, even though his chest felt like it was about to collapse under the sudden, immense weight of everything. The lost years, the unexpected connection, the terrifying reality of being a father. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm, trying to convey the absolute truth of that one word. "Really, Chloe? I'm your dad." Chloe stared at him for another long second, her blue eyes searching his face, before a small, hesitant smile slowly tugged at the corner of her lips. "Oh," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a wave of profound relief washing over him, chasing away some of the fear. Then, to his complete surprise, Chloe reached out her small hand and took his. Alex felt his entire body go still, every nerve ending on high alert. Her fingers were so small, so delicate, so warm against his palm. And in that moment, in that quiet, unexpected connection, for the first time in his life, Nicholas Alexander Vance, the man who had built an empire from nothing, the man who had never let anyone truly in, felt like he had just found something more important, more valuable, more real than anything he had ever built or controlled. Alex stared down at the small hand wrapped around his own, feeling something shift deep inside him, a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface of his controlled world. Chloe's fingers were impossibly tiny, yet they gripped his hand with a quiet confidence that made his chest tighten with a new, unfamiliar emotion that felt suspiciously like overwhelming love. He had spent years negotiating million-dollar deals, standing in boardrooms with some of the most powerful people in the world, navigating treacherous social and business landscapes. And yet, he had never felt as utterly unprepared, as vulnerable as he did at this moment. Chloe's blue eyes, his eyes, blinked up at him with innocent curiosity, as if waiting to see what he would do next, what the next chapter in this unexpected story would be. She wasn't scared of him. She wasn't pulling away. She was just there, holding his hand like it was the most natural, the most obvious thing in the world, like she had been doing it her entire life. Alex swallowed hard, his mind racing a mile a minute. He knew he should have been furious. He should have been demanding answers, demanding to know why Sarah had kept this monumental truth from him for so long, why she had stolen 5 years of his daughter's life, 5 years of his life. But standing there, looking down at Chloe, at the trusting way she held his hand, the only thing he could think about was the staggering amount of time he had already lost. 5 years. 5 years of first words, first steps, bedtime stories, scraped knees and triumphant laughter. Memories he would never, ever get back. A vast, empty space in the narrative of his life, in the narrative of her life. The weight of that loss felt suddenly unbearable. Sarah's voice broke the silence, hesitant but firm. "Chloe, sweetheart, why don't you go sit at the counter for a minute? I need to talk to." She hesitated, glancing quickly at Alex before finishing, her voice low. "I need to talk to Mr. Vance." Chloe looked between them, sensing the subtle tension in her mother's voice, the shift in the air, but she didn't argue. She simply gave Alex's hand one last gentle squeeze before letting go and skipping over to the counter, climbing onto a stool with an easy, practiced grace. The second she was out of earshot, engrossed in watching the barista, Alex turned to Sarah, his jaw tight again, the anger and pain resurfacing, though tempered now by the reality of Chloe. "We need to talk. Now, Sarah." Sarah exhaled slowly, nodding, her arms crossing over her chest defensively. "I know, Alex." Alex clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to maintain a semblance of the control he was rapidly losing. "Why?" The single word came out rough, edged with 1,000 unspoken emotions he hadn't had time, hadn't allowed himself to process. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you keep this from me?" Sarah looked away for a second, her gaze fixed on a point beyond his shoulder, as if bracing herself for his inevitable fury. "Because I was scared, Alex," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I honestly thought that if I told you, you'd feel trapped, that you'd feel like you had to choose between the life you were building and a child you never planned for, a child that would disrupt everything." Alex let out a sharp, harsh breath, shaking his head in disbelief, the unfairness of it all a bitter taste in his mouth. "That wasn't your choice to make, Sarah. You don't get to decide how I would have felt. You don't get to erase me from my own daughter's life because you assumed I wouldn't want her. Because you assumed I wasn't capable of being a father." Her jaw tightened defensively, her own pain flashing in her eyes. "You weren't ready, Alex. You know it. I knew it. You were working 18-hour days, traveling across the world, obsessed with building your company, your empire. You barely even had time for yourself, let alone for a baby, for sleepless nights and pediatrician appointments and school plays. It wasn't fair to expect that of you." Alex took a step closer, his blue eyes burning into hers, fierce with a pain that went deeper than any business defeat. "That doesn't mean I wouldn't have tried, Sarah. It doesn't mean I wouldn't have figured it out. For her." Sarah flinched slightly at his words, the raw conviction in his voice shaking her. But she didn't look away this time. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered again, the mantra she had clung to for years, now sounding hollow and fragile. Alex exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "Well, you weren't," he said, his voice lower now, rougher, filled with the weight of what was lost. "You weren't doing the right thing, Sarah. You robbed me of 5 years. You took away my right to know her, to be there for her, to watch her grow up. And now I'm just supposed to accept that? Just pretend like those 5 years didn't happen." Sarah's throat tightened, tears glistening in her eyes again. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you." Alex's voice was quieter now, controlled once more, but no less intense, no less filled with the ache of his pain. "But you did, Sarah. God help me, you did. You hurt both of us. And most importantly, you hurt her, by keeping half of who she is a secret." Silence stretched between them again, thick with everything left unsaid, with the lingering accusations and the undeniable reality of the little girl sitting at the counter. Alex took another deep breath, forcing himself to push past the immediate surge of anger, past the resentment that threatened to consume him. He couldn't change the past, no matter how much he wanted to, no matter how much it felt like a gaping wound in his life. Those 5 years were gone. But Chloe wasn't. His voice was steadier when he spoke again, the tone shifting from accusation to a fierce, unwavering determination. "I'm not walking away from her, Sarah. Not now. Not ever." Sarah swallowed hard, nodding slowly, a flicker of something that looked like relief crossing her face, surprising him. I didn't expect you to, Alex." Alex studied her, searching her expression for any sign that she was still going to fight him on this, still going to try and keep him at a distance. But all he saw was exhaustion, guilt, and that unexpected hint of relief, as if a burden she had carried alone for too long was finally starting to lift. He glanced over at the counter where Chloe was happily swinging her legs, her small face intent as she played with a cafe napkin like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. His daughter. The thought sent another jolt through him, a dizzying mix of wonder and regret. He turned back to Sarah, his voice firm. "We need to figure this out, Sarah. For her. Whatever it takes." Sarah nodded again, her voice softer this time, acknowledging the shared responsibility, the unexpected partnership forced upon them by a twist of fate. "Yeah, Alex. We do." For the first time that night, in the chaotic aftermath of a life-altering revelation, Alex felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, a feeling that he was finally taking control of something truly meaningful again. But this time, it wasn't about business deals or corporate power. It was about being a father. Alex had spent his entire life solving problems, negotiating impossible deals, and turning insurmountable obstacles into profitable opportunities. He thrived in high-pressure situations, his mind a steel trap for strategy. But as he sat across from Sarah in the small cafe booth, the scent of coffee and pastry hanging in the air, he realized this was the one situation he couldn't approach like a business transaction. There was no strategy, no quick fix, no meticulously worded contract that could rewrite the last 5 years and erase the time he had lost with his daughter. This was personal. This was life, messy and unpredictable, crashing into his controlled existence. Sarah sat across from him, her posture still tense, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if bracing herself for a conversation she had spent 5 years desperately avoiding. Chloe was still perched at the counter, happily sipping on a glass of juice the waitress had given her, her small legs swinging beneath the stool, blissfully unaware of the emotional earthquake playing out just a few feet away. Alex leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his gaze locked on Sarah's. His voice was steady now, deliberate, but there was no missing the raw edge of frustration still lingering beneath the surface, the echo of the pain she had caused him. "I need to be in her life, Sarah. For her. I don't care how we figure it out, I don't care what it takes. But I'm not walking away from her. Not now. Not ever." Sarah exhaled slowly, looking down at the table for a long moment before meeting his gaze again, a flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. "I know, Alex," she admitted, her voice quiet, tinged with a weariness that spoke of years of carrying this secret alone. And, I'm not going to stop you. Alex studied her carefully, searching for any sign of resistance, any hint of hesitation, of trying to push him away again. But the way she said it, so certain, so resigned, yet also with that subtle hint of relief, told him she had already made peace with the fact that keeping him away wasn't an option anymore. The truth was out, and there was no going back. He nodded slowly, running a hand through his hair, trying to process the speed at which his life was changing. Good, he said, his voice firm. Because I'm not asking for permission, Sarah. I'm stating a fact. Sarah's lips pressed into a tight, thin line, a ghost of her old defiance. I didn't think you were, Alex. A moment of silence passed between them, thick with everything they hadn't said, everything they still needed to unravel. Alex didn't just want to be a part of Chloe's life. He realized with a startling clarity that he needed to be a fundamental piece of his being. One he hadn't even known was missing, had just been found. But he also knew this wasn't something that could happen overnight. Chloe didn't know him, not as her father, and no matter how desperately he wanted to make up for lost time, he had to accept that it would take time for her to trust him, to see him as more than just the nice man who helped me. Sarah must have read some of the thoughts, the questions, swirling on his face because she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly, her hands loosening their white-knuckled grip on the table edge. She doesn't know anything about you, Alex, she admitted, her voice soft with regret. I never told her about you, not even your name. Alex clenched his jaw, the pain of that realization sharp and sudden, but he forced himself to stay calm, to remember that this wasn't about his anger anymore. It was about Chloe. Not even my name? He repeated, the words tasting like ash. Sarah shook her head, her gaze distant, lost in the past. She asked once, a long time ago, maybe when she was 3, why she didn't have a dad like some of the other kids at daycare. I told her that families come in all different forms, and that ours was just the 2 of us. After that, she stopped asking. Alex's chest tightened painfully at the image of a 3-year-old Chloe asking about a father she didn't know she had. She deserves to know the truth, Sarah. All of it. I know, Sarah said, and for the first time that night, her voice cracked slightly, raw with emotion. I know, Alex, but you have to understand. She's never had a father figure in her life. She doesn't know what that means, what that looks like. She's used to it just being us, the 2 of us against the world. Alex exhaled slowly, forcing himself to push down the whirlwind of emotions threatening to rise, the regret, the anger, the overwhelming sense of lost time. Then we'll take it slow, he said, his voice firm, a promise to both of them, but mostly to Chloe. I don't want to overwhelm her. I don't want to scare her. Sarah hesitated for a long moment, studying his face, searching for sincerity, for patience, for the man she had loved 10 years ago beneath the controlled exterior of the billionaire. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, Alex, we can try that. Take it slow. Alex leaned back in the booth, trying to process the staggering speed at which everything in his life had changed. Hours ago, he had walked into this quiet cafe expecting nothing more than a solitary, peaceful meal, and now he was sitting across from the mother of his child, a child he hadn't known existed, trying to figure out how to navigate the impossible, how to be a father to a daughter who was a complete stranger. Sarah's voice softened slightly, a hint of vulnerability in her tone that he hadn't heard in years. She likes you, you know, Alex. Alex's eyes flicked up to meet hers, a spark of genuine hope in his gaze. She does. Sarah nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips as she glanced toward the counter where Chloe was now drawing intently on a napkin with a red crayon the waitress had given her. She does. She's usually not that comfortable with strangers, especially men she doesn't know, but she let you hold her hand. That's not something she does often. It means she trusts you. Alex felt a lump form in his throat, thick with emotion. He looked at Chloe again, watching the way she scrunched up her face in concentration as she carefully traced a shape on the napkin. He knew, logically, that he didn't deserve this instant acceptance, this innocent trust from her, after everything that had happened, after all the time that had been stolen. But he wasn't going to waste it either. "I want to take her out sometime," he said finally, the words a hesitant step into their unknown future. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Just me and her. Maybe to a park." Sarah hesitated again, her eyes searching his, perhaps looking for reassurance that he understood the fragility of this moment. Then slowly she nodded. "We can try that, Alex. Park. That would be good. We can try that." Alex exhaled slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time since this life-altering conversation had begun. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase the past or fill the void of the lost years. But it was a start, a fragile, terrifying, hopeful beginning. And for now, for the first time in 5 years, that was all he could dare to ask for. The mystery of their future stretched before them, daunting but no longer entirely dark. Alex arrived at the park earlier than planned 2 days later, the unaccustomed anxiety a tight knot in his chest. He paced near the playground, adjusting his tie, feeling ridiculously overdressed in his casual but expensive attire. It had been 2 days since his world had imploded in that quiet cafe, 2 days since he had learned he had a daughter, and yet everything still felt surreal, like a bizarre, vivid dream he couldn't wake from. He had spent those nights lying awake in his vast, empty penthouse, replaying the moment over and over in his head. Chloe's eyes, Sarah's whispered confession, the feel of a tiny hand in his own, trying desperately to come to terms with how drastically his meticulously planned life had changed in the span of a single evening. He wasn't afraid of responsibility. He had built an empire from the ground up, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, navigated pressure that would have broken most men. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. This was a small girl with his eyes, a woman from his past, and a future he had never dared to imagine. A gust of wind rustled the golden autumn leaves around his feet, and Alex glanced toward the entrance of the park just as Sarah appeared, walking hand in hand with Chloe. His breath caught slightly as he took them in. Sarah, looking hesitant, reserved, her shoulders tense as if bracing herself for confrontation, and Chloe, bouncing slightly with each step, chattering excitedly to her mother about something invisible in the air, her tiny hands waving animatedly as she spoke. They were a unit, a complete world of two, and he was the outsider, the unknown variable. He watched as Chloe spotted him. Her chatter stopped mid-sentence. She blinked up at him for a moment, assessing him, as if checking that he was still the same person from the cafe, not a trick of the light. Then, to his surprise, a wide, radiant grin spread across her face. The same grin he sometimes saw in his own reflection when something unexpected went right. "You're here," she announced loudly, the sound cutting through his anxiety, tugging sharply at Sarah's hand before breaking free and running towards him, her small legs pumping furiously. Alex barely had time to brace himself before she reached him, stopping just inches away, tilting her head back to look up at him with that same unsettling, familiar curiosity. "Did you bring me a book?" she asked, her voice full of anticipation, her eyes fixed on his coat pocket. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a mix of relief and unexpected delight. Of all the things she could have said, of all the difficult questions he had braced himself for, he hadn't expected that simple, hopeful question. But it made him smile, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, the kind he rarely showed the world. "I did, Chloe," he said, crouching down to her level, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a small hardcover storybook with a colorful illustration on the front. "Your mom told me you like fairy tales," Chloe gasped dramatically, clutching her hands to her chest, her blue eyes wide with delight. "I love fairy tales. Are there dragons?" Alex nodded, his smile widening, feeling a strange sense of ease settle over him, an ease he never felt in a boardroom. "Big ones, and princesses who aren't afraid of them." Chloe grinned, a determined sparkle in her eyes. "I like princesses who fight dragons. They're cooler than the ones who just wait for a prince." Alex chuckled, glancing up at Sarah, who had approached slowly and was now standing a few feet away, watching them with a guarded, yet visibly intrigued, expression. He could tell she was still trying to process how easily Chloe had taken to him, how naturally they seemed to connect over dragons and princesses. He didn't blame her. He was just as surprised himself. "Do you want me to read it to you, Chloe?" he asked, shifting his attention back to his daughter. Chloe thought about it for a moment, her brow furrowed in serious consideration, then nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, please, but only if we sit on the swings. It's the best place for stories." Alex hesitated for only a second, glancing at Sarah for approval, a silent question passing between them. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her lips pressed together as if still deciding, still processing how she felt about all of this, about him stepping into their carefully guarded world. "Swings it is," Alex said, straightening up. Chloe grabbed his hand without hesitation, her small fingers wrapping around his, pulling him towards the playground with surprising strength. Alex let himself be led, still in quiet awe of how naturally she accepted him, how easily she welcomed him into her world. He had expected distance, hesitation, maybe even outright resistance, a reflection of the years of absence. But instead, she acted as if he had always been there, as if he was already a familiar, comfortable part of her life. As they reached the swings, Chloe climbed onto one and motioned for him to sit on the one beside her. Alex obliged, the stiff fabric of his expensive trousers feeling strange on the worn plastic seat, holding the book in his lap as he opened it. Chloe leaned in close, her small legs kicking slightly as she waited for him to start reading. He began to read, his voice steady, a low, resonant sound, but he was only half focused on the words on the page. His mind kept drifting to the little girl beside him, the way she listened with such rapt attention, her big blue eyes fixed on the illustrations, the way she already trusted him implicitly, without question, without knowing anything about the man he was outside of this park, outside of being the nice man from the cafe. It was humbling in a way nothing in his cutthroat business world had ever been. Halfway through the story, Chloe suddenly reached for his sleeve, tugging it gently, pulling his attention away from the book. "You have a nice voice," she said matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. Like a prince." Alex blinked, caught completely off guard by the unexpected compliment, the simple, profound innocence of it. He wasn't sure why, but her words settled something deep inside him. A restless part of his soul he hadn't even known was agitated. Sarah, who had moved closer and was standing just a few feet away, her arms crossed, let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head softly. "That's a first," she murmured, a hint of genuine amusement in her voice. Alex smirked, shaking his head, the easy banter feeling surprisingly familiar, surprisingly comfortable. "You think so?" he asked Chloe, turning back to her, his voice playful. Chloe nodded solemnly, completely serious. "Yep, Prince. Or maybe a knight." Alex leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a playful whisper, sharing a secret just between them. "Knights fight dragons, you know, Chloe." Chloe's eyes widened with delight, catching his playful tone. "They do? That means you could be one." Alex chuckled, flipping the page of the storybook, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Guess we'll have to find out, won't we?" Sarah was still watching them, her arms crossed, but there was something softer in her expression now, something that wasn't guarded or hesitant, something that told Alex she was seeing something she hadn't expected to see, a connection she hadn't dared to hope for. They stayed at the park for hours, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. They played on the swings, slid down the slides, talked about everything and nothing, and read more stories until Chloe's voice grew tired. When it was finally time to leave, as Sarah began to gather their things, Chloe surprised Alex again. She walked right up to him and hugged him without hesitation, wrapping her small arms tightly around his waist. He froze for half a second, completely unprepared for the simple, trusting gesture. Then, slowly, gently, he returned the hug, his large arms wrapping around her small body, holding her close. Something in his chest tightened with an overwhelming wave of emotion, a potent mix of regret for the lost time and profound gratitude for this unexpected moment. As Sarah led her toward the car, Chloe looked over her shoulder, waving energetically, a wide, happy grin on her face. "Bye, night, Alex." Alex let out a shaky huff of a laugh, shaking his head as he waved back, a lump forming in his throat. Night, Alex. It wasn't the title he was used to, but it felt infinitely more important than any corporate designation. Sarah lingered for a moment by the car before finally meeting his gaze, her expression softening, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. That went better than I expected, Alex." Alex nodded, his own smile genuine now, reflecting hers. "Yeah, Sarah, it did. There was still so much to figure out, so many difficult conversations left to have, so many years of absence to navigate. But for the first time since all of this had started, since his controlled world had shattered in that quiet cafe, Alex felt something close to peace. And for now, for this fragile, hopeful beginning, that was enough. He wasn't running after another deal, another success metric, another number on a balance sheet. For the first time, he was exactly where he needed to be, and he wasn't going to let it go. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Chloe had hugged him before leaving the park. It was such a small gesture, something most parents probably took for granted every single day. But to him, it had meant everything. He hadn't expected it. He had barely known what to do when her little arms wrapped around him, trusting him completely, accepting him without reservation. And yet, in that moment, something deep inside him had settled, a restless part of his soul that had been searching for something, though he never knew what, since the night he learned the truth. Now, 2 days later, he stood outside Sarah's apartment building, a modest low-rise on a tree-lined street, shifting his weight, the expensive leather of his briefcase feeling alien in this simple, quiet setting. He had been invited this time, a tentative step forward, but that didn't make it any less daunting. He was still an outsider in their world, a world built by Sarah and Chloe, a world he was trying desperately to find his place in. The door opened, and Sarah stood there, her dark brown eyes scanning his face with the same guarded expression she always wore around him, a shield she hadn't quite lowered yet. But there was something different now, something less defensive, something that held a flicker of tentative hope. She stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The apartment was small, perhaps, compared to his penthouse, but it was filled with a palpable warmth and coziness that his own sterile, minimalist space lacked. The living room walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves, displaying well-loved titles and stacks of children's books. There were a few framed pictures on the walls, photos of Chloe, laughing, playing, bundled up in winter coats, pictures that chronicled a life he had missed. The couch, clearly well used, was piled with soft blankets and mismatched pillows. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it felt undeniably like home. And for the first time, Alex realized just how little he actually knew about the life Sarah had built for herself and their daughter. A life far removed from his world of private jets and exclusive boardrooms. "Chloe's in her room," Sarah said, closing the door softly behind him, her voice still quiet, reserved. "She's been talking about you non-stop since the park. Night Alex this, night Alex that." Alex felt something warm spread through his chest at that, a sudden, unexpected lightness. That's a good sign, right?" She nodded slowly, a small, hesitant smile touching her lips as she crossed her arms over her chest. "Yeah, Alex, it really is. It means she's letting you in." Before he could say anything else, before the weight of their conversation could settle back upon them, small, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A second later, Chloe appeared in the living room archway, a radiant vision in a bright yellow princess dress, a plastic tiara slightly crooked on her head, clutching a well-loved stuffed dragon. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes lighting up like twin stars. "You came!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with pure joy, the dragon momentarily forgotten. Alex smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, crouching slightly so he was closer to her level. "I told you I would, Chloe." Chloe beamed, lifting the fabric of her princess dress as she twirled, the skirt fanning out around her. "I'm a princess today," she announced proudly. She struck a pose, holding her stuffed dragon aloft. But not the kind that waits for a prince. She looked him dead in the eye, a fierce, determined glint in her blue gaze, his gaze. The kind that fights dragons. Alex let out a quiet chuckle, his heart full, feeling a profound connection to this fierce little girl. "That's the best kind of princess, Chloe." Chloe nodded seriously, as if sharing a deeply important secret. "Mommy says you're staying for dinner." What happens next in this unexpected family saga? Will Alex and Sarah navigate their complicated past for Chloe's sake? Let us know your predictions in the comments. If you enjoyed this part of the story, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe so you're ready for the next chapter. Thanks for watching.